Good morning. Welcome to Books by Ivan. My name is Ivan and I read books. Today we'll be continuing with The River Between, but before that, guess what? Guess what just came? Okay, okay. It's finally here. Took an entire month to get here, but this is for later. But right now, let's focus on what's at hand. Ladies and gentlemen, this is The River Between. Wayaki emerged from the smoke-clouded hut and walked away slowly, dragging his feet and shambling over things like a drunken man. The hut belonged to Jerry, the aunt of Mathoni. She had no husband, for her man had died years back after an attack of strange illness. She was now a middle-aged woman for whom life had lost most of its attraction. Having no children of her own, she readily welcomed into her home any young people and children. A little while before, her life had been illuminated by Mathoni, who had turned to her for refuge. But life was not kind to her. Mathoni was now dead. As Wayaki walked aimlessly along the ridge, he wondered what Jerry would do, for she would no doubt be blamed for the death of Mathoni. Wayaki could see her face, which had become all at once wrinkled when she heard the sad news. It had been unbearable, that simple act of hiding her face in her hands and standing still without tears. Nyumbura and her mother wept without speaking, without a sight even. Only tears flowed down continuously. They had even come to await the return of Wayaki and the 10 young men who had taken Mathoni to Serenia. Wayaki was unable to look at Nyumbura or her mother. He just told the news and then after a while stumbled out the house. It was 3 days and still left Camino. Wayaki did not go straight home. The sun seemed to have set early. The country was dull, pale, orange. Everything seemed strangely quiet. The cattle returning home did not make much noise and there was no children prancing about. Wherever Wayaki went, the silent face of Mathoni would come and bar the way. Then he would turn away in another direction. Still, she was there, everywhere. Livingston had been at the hospital, and the white woman too. Mathoni remained calm, and her eyes had an intense glow that she had been with her all along the difficult journey. She had not been able to walk, but a young man had made some stretchers and carried her on it. She had not talked much, but as time she spoke of Nyumbura. That's her sister, by the way. Wayaki knew Mathoni loved her sister. He remembered a day soon after Nyumbura had begun to visit Mathoni. He had entered the hut and found the 2 girls arguing. "I am still a Christian. See, a Christian in the tribe. Look, I am a woman and will grow big and healthy in the tribe." Even after he had entered, she rambled on. She had not known how fast she was wasting away. She did not last many hours after they arrived in Serenia. Wayaki could still remember her last word as they approached the hospital. "Wayaki," she turned to him. "Tell Nyumbura I see Jesus, and I am a woman, beautiful in the tribe." She had died clinging to that image, to that obsession which had led her from Wayaki to Camino. Who knew what it was? The only question which people had asked was, why did she do it? Why? Why? And even for Wayaki, the question remained, why? Darkness came and found Wayaki wandering like a lost spirit. Had he too been taken by that dream? It was her secret, and she had died for it. He reached his own hut, recently built for him, lit the lamp and went to bed. He could not sleep, and all through the night he kept on asking why. He did not know whom he was asking. Joshua heard the death of Methoni without a sign of emotion on the face. A slight tremor in the voice when he spoke was the only thing that betrayed him. He did not ask Miriamu when she died or how Miriamu had learned of the facts. Miriamu wept even more when she saw that impassive face. To him, Methoni had ceased to exist on the very day she had sold herself to the devil. Methoni had turned her head and longed for the cursed land. Lots of wives had done the same thing, and she had been turned to stone, a rock of salt, to be forever a stern warning to others. The journey to the New Jerusalem with God was not easy. It was beset with temptation, but Joshua was determined to triumph, to walk with a brisk step, his eyes on the cross. Methoni had been an outcast. Anything cursed here on earth will also be cursed in heaven. Let that be a warning to God. Sorry, I was getting ahead of myself. Let that be a warning to those who rebelled against their parents and the laws of God. JKP held this in silence. No longer would the voice be heard. No longer would he give the warning. He had done his work. Had he not foreseen this drama? Had he not seen the estrangement between father and daughter, son and father, because of the new faith? This was a punishment to Joshua. It was also a punishment to the hills. It was a warning to all to stick to the ways of the ridges, to the ancient wisdom of the land, to its rituals and songs. Would Joshua listen? Would Kaboni hearken to the voice of angry Murungu? Jacket feared for them. He feared for those who had embraced strange gods. Would the ridges listen and rise up together? Mukuyu and Camino still antagonized each other. Mukuyu was now the home of the Christians, while Camino remained the home of all that was beautiful in the tribe. Who will ever bring them together? The death of Methoni did not augur well for the future. It might bring further strife. Chege did not like the way his son had become involved in the affair. He feared for him, but he admired Wayaki, his figure and his youth. He could not say anything to him. Already he found that he could not really understand his son. Would he be corrupted by Serenia? Again he felt his bone creak. He touched his gray hair with a sigh and meditatively watched the dying day as he sat on the three-legged stool in front of his hut. He questioned the wisdom of having sent his son to the mission place. Would he, Jackie, be punished like Joshua? What of the prophecy? He thought of going to seek a man of his generation with whom he could talk things over. He stood up. The cold evening wind made him shake a little. He was old. He sighed again, but his sigh was not due to age or the realization that his time was gone. It was a sight of many who that night and weeks after talk of Methoni's death. The fact was that nobody knew for sure what the death portended. Far away in Serenia, it was a sight. It was a sigh with a different meaning. The death of Methoni forever confirmed the barbarity of Kikuyu customs. Livingstone, the head of the mission, had always shown reluctance in the penetrating of the ridges. He had always liked the idea of training some mission boys who could then be sent out to spread the good news. He was not an old man, bald-headed, and with a double chin. He had a large pith helmet of which he was very fond. He rarely removed it from his head, but when he did, the almost shit-white bald head made a big contrast to the freckled face, hands, and feet. Whenever he moved, his knees shook a little, while his tired voice and habit of speech was characterized by a tendency to pronounce R, even where some of the other men and women at the mission would not. His knowledge of Kikuyu language was tolerably good. 25 years stay at the mission was not such a short period. When he came to the mission, he was full of vigor and certainty, full of great expectation. He always looked to a time when his effort would produce fruits, but as years went on, he realized that he wasn't making as much progress as he had expected he would. This was a disappointment to a man who had left home for a wild country, fired by a dream of heroism and the vision of many new souls, whom for Christ, through his own effort. His call and his mission had not met with the response he had once hoped for. True, the school and the hospital had expanded a great deal, but his people seemed only interested in education while they paid lip service to salvation. They were entrenched in their blind custom. Children became ill. People believed that they were bewitched. A man died. His body was abandoned without burial. And then the circumcision. It was barbarous. Livingstone was one of those missionaries who thought themselves enlightened. They were determined to learn the custom of the native and not repeat the mistake of the missionary of the earlier generation who had caused trial, warfare, and civil strife because they could not appreciate the importance of tribal custom. In this spirit, he had attended some of the dances of the eve of circumcision, but he was horrified beyond measure. The song he heard and the action he saw convinced him beyond any doubt that these people were immoral through and through. He was thoroughly nauseated, and he never went to such another dance. Circumcision had to be rooted out if there was to be any hope of salvation for these people. Livingstone was a man of moderation and advocated a gradual method of eradicating the custom. In spite of pressure by some great enthusiasts, he refused to adopt rash and desperate measures. This was during his early years, but when he saw that this policy of letting things gradually happen had not had what he hoped for results, he began to preach against the custom vigorously. Even then, the war was not on. Would he eventually give way to pressure? He was growing old. New blood had joined in Serenia, and then Methoni died after circumcision, after this brutal mutilation of her body. People who accused him, he felt cheated by fate. Circumstances were laughing at his old age, but he will show them that the Spirit of the Lord still burned in him. Age did not matter. It was Christ who could be fighting the plans of darkness through him. Yes, Christ working in him, making him young in action. Circumcision had now to be fought by all means in their hands. He could count on Joshua and Kaboni to help him. And then a woman came to him. He was in his office and was startled to see her. Martha was one of the staunchest critics of his policies. "Excuse me, Reverend." "Yes." "Do you know the girl who died?" "Merthoni. She was Baba Buyaki and some other mission boys." "You don't know her father?" No. She is the daughter of, yes, Joshua." She was rather triumphantly. There was a twinkle in her eyes. There was a short space of total silence, and then, "Oh!" It was a small groan, almost pathetic. The war was now on. Chapter 12. Within a few weeks, the name of Rithoni was a legend. Stories grew up around her name. Some people said she had not actually died of the wound, but that she had been poisoned by the missionary. Indeed, one of the boats who had taken her had seen this. The elders from Mukuyu gathered together, made a few irrelevant remarks, and then looked at another. They understood. This new faith has contaminated the hills, and Murungu was angry. Listen to the roaring thunder in the sky. Look at the blinding lightning flashing across the earth. They remembered Chege and his words. They ought to have listened to him. The white man should never have set a foot in Serenia. A government post was being built on the ridge next to Mukuyu, and it was now clear that people would never, and it was not clear that people will have to pay taxes. What could they do? It was now too late to take action. Chege was near to dying. A strange disease of the stomach confronted him in his home. Added to this was the strength of these Christians, led by Joshua and Kabonye. They had almost established Mukuyu as their stronghold. Some elders, however, argued that it did not matter. The death of Mathomi had clearly shown that nothing but evil would come out of any association with the new faith. And Chege's son, the eldest, feared Chege out never to have allowed him to associate with Serenia. And Joshua's followers gathered. They talked and sang praises to God. With only was an evil spirit descend to try the faithful. It was not clear to all that nothing but evil could come out of adherence of tribal custom. Joshua, their leader, was inspired. He now preached with vigor, and a strange holiness danced in his eyes. He had been to Serenia and explained the situation to Livingstone. Livingstone had understood. Now Joshua came with a new message. Circumcision was wholly evil. Thenceforth, nobody would ever be a member of Christ's church if he was so much as found connected in any way with circumcision rites. The fire in Joshua gave new strength and hope to his follower. The white men in Serenia and other places were behind them, and with them all, God. Buyaki did not go back to Serenia. His father was very ill and he could not leave him alone. Buyaki watched his father with fear. He could not visualize a home without him. What would he do? What would the hills do? He cast his mind back and saw the father he had always seen, yet he had not really known. What kept Chege always aloof even when he stood near you? What was it his concern for the tribe? Was that the old man's dream to which he clung day by day, every hour of his life? Buyaki remembered that day in his childhood. That was the closer he had come to understanding his father. It was as if Chege had laid his soul bare for a second to the young boy. He had never again lain so exposed. It was strange that Buyaki should now recall the event so vividly, especially as it had for a long time been fading in his mind, losing its clear edges. Had the missionary come to within the split between Mukuyu and Camino, he saw the two ridges glaring at one another menacingly. Were they going to fight it out between themselves, the missionary encouraging his followers? What surprised Ryaki were the unprecedented feeling of hatred routed by Methoni's death. Yet the event by itself looked small. Perhaps it was one of those things in history which, though seemingly small, have far-reaching consequences. Girls had been initiated before, but even the one or two who had died never aroused such ill will between the people. Ryaki saw greater splits coming. He knew that the strictness now adopted by Livingstone would alienate even those who had taken to the new ways, so would not entirely abandon their custom, as now advocated by Joshua. He did not wait long for the split. It came from the most unexpected direction. Guboni, the great friend of Joshua, was the first to break away. He was followed by many others. Joshua remained loyal. He gathered the remains together and they confronted each other like disciples of old. Ryaki's heart sank with heaviness because of this unrest. Where was his place in all this? He felt a stranger to his land. One day, Ryaki was returning home from a distant hill. He had gone there to meet a friend and get a shrub which had been recommended to his father. Cheki would never hear of eating the white man's medicine after what happened to Methoni. It was while he was there that he heard the news. The children of those who defied the laws of church and continued with their tribal custom will have to leave Serenia, and no child of pagan would again be allowed into school unless the child was a refugee. Even then, the child will have to renounce circumcision. Ryaki knew that to be the end of him. He had hoped he would finish his final year, for he loved learning. He came home with a downcast face. He felt unwell and wanted to go in his hut and stay there by himself. When he came home, he found his mother standing outside. She was weeping. Ryaki was surprised and immediately forgot his own thought. He had never seen his mother's tears. "What is it, mother?" She burst into fresh sobs. "What is it?" he asked again with fear. Just then, he saw a group of elders come out of his father's hut. He threw the shrubs away bitterly and ran towards the hut, hoping against hope that they would see him alive, even if for a second. Chapter 13. Drip, drip. All along the edge of the corrugated iron roof, drip, drip, all in line, large determined drops of rain fell on the ground as if they were competing. They made little holes, like basins, scoop like drip. That fat one was transparent and clear. Down it fell into the small basin its sister had patiently helped to make. It struck the pool of water in the hole, and muddy water jumped up, forming an impatient cornhole, and muddy water jumped up. I'm sorry, I'm rereading this because it's bunched up together. Sorry. It struck the pool of water in the hole, and muddy water jumped up, forming an impatient cone-shaped pillar, and all along the ground the cones jumped up like soldiers marking time. The grass outside, which for a long time has been scorched and sickly, was now beginning to wake up refreshed, and the rain came down in a fury. The straying thin showers forming a misty cloudiness so you could hardly see a few yards away. The jumping cones were doing it faster and faster. Soon, the dripping stopped and was replaced by jets of water from the roof. They carried on the race as React stood at the door of his office, his left foot on the lowest rod and supporting himself with his hand held firm against the side frames. He watched the slanting raindrops meditatively. The barrack, like mud-walled building made of poles and thatched, could vaguely be seen through the misty rain, standing as he had done for about 3 years now. This was all the school, his office plus the building, which was divided into 4 classrooms. Ryaki knew only too well what was happening inside. The rotting grass, thatched, was not deterrent to rain. Numerous pools of water must have already formed on the floor. This was the price the education that his children had to pay. Probably they were all huddled together in groups, shivering, maybe in a dry corner. The lucky ones had something to cover their heads with. Inside the office, his fellow teachers, Kamo and Kinuthia, were arguing over something. Both were sitting on a portable. Both were sitting on the portal table, as was their custom. They came there because the office was also the staff room. Wherever they had a meeting, a talk, an argument, or something, a quarrel, they came here. They talked politics, religion, women, anything. On the floor, at the 2 corners nearest the door, were 2 heaps of miscellaneous objects. The office was also the storeroom. The school equipment was stored there. It was almost hopeless to try and keep things in proper order for any length of time. The rain poured on. Wayaki watched, thinking confusedly about the school and the country of the sleeping lions. The country could now no longer be called isolated, since the alienation of all the land in the hills and ridges around Serenia to white settlers. The country of the sleeping lions was like any other part of Kikuyu country. As his father has once told him, the arm of the white man was long. The conquest of the hills was well underway. Some people were already working on the alienated lands to get money for paying taxes. Is it bad? Is it bad? Kinuta was saying. I say the white man should go back wherever he came from, and leave us to till our land in peace. The rest was drowned by the falling rain. It was as if Kinuta were commenting on the thoughts passing through Wayaki's mind. Kinuta was normally calm, but when he had an argument, his slow-moving eyes would change and dance with excitement. Then he would speak, waving his arms in the air, a short man with powerful built shoulders and a determined little chin. He had a way of forcing his point home, more by the vehemence of his voice than by cool logic. The political discussion held in the office were a sign of what was happening all over the ridges. There was indeed a growing need to do something. The feeling had been strengthened by this most recent alienation, the land use Serenia, forcing many people to move from places they had lived for in ages, while others had to live on the same land, working for their new masters. The break with Serenia made the situation worse and inflamed the people the more. They felt the bite of injustice. Some felt the ridges had slept for too long. Trigger warning were now recalled, and some people wish they had responded to the call in the very early days. Small organizations sprouted in the hills. Ryaki always found himself involved. Already, they had come to see him as a leader, and they instinctively turned to him for small things. But Ryaki was always worried by thoughts of there ever widening gulf between Joshua followers and breakaway elements. Ryaki hard warned towards Kinuthia, but he could never feel the same warmth for Kamo. Kamo, the son of Kubuni, once Joshua follower and now the leading man among those who had broken ties with Serenia, was thin and tall, but probably he was not as tall as many people had expected when he was a boy. His eyes, however, retained the same strained look. Ryaki never liked the way Kamo looked at him with his small, sunken eyes, their white-fledged brown. They gave him that appearance of cunning that Ryaki detested. Kamo did not like him either. A young man who rises to leadership is always a target of jealousy for his equals, for those older than himself, and for those who think they could have been better leaders. Kamo was a neat man, with his hair always closely cropped. But there seemed to be something uncanny, something almost inhumane in his neatness. The rain came down with greater vigor. The heated argument still went on, and Ryaki contemplated the rain and the country, the edges of his thoughts becoming blurred. Suppose your father. We are not talking about my father, Kamo interrupted. Ryaki turned his head slightly and detected a frown on Kinuthia's face. There was a tense atmosphere in the room. Then suddenly Kinuthia laughed. He was joined by Kamo. Long ago these two had fought on the question of fathers. You should be patient, Kamo, Ryaki put it. He too was joining in the laughter. Kinuthia resumed almost at once. Of course, I mean your father as an example. For example, you see, I shall take my father for example, if you like. He is the head of the family. Suppose another man, Karanja of Njuguna, for example, comes in and we offer him hospitality. Suppose after a time he deposes my father and makes himself the head of the family with a right to control a property. Do you think he has any morals right to do it? Do you, Ryaki? And do you think I am bound by any consideration to obey him? And if conditions become intolerable, it lies with me to rebel, not only against him, but also against all that is harsh, unfair, and unjust. Take Serenia mission for example. The men of God came peacefully. They were given a place. Now see what has happened. They have invited their brothers to come and take all the lands. Our country is invaded. This government post behind Mukuyu is a plague in our midst. And this hard task. He was exhausted. He looked around defiantly and yet sorrowfully. Then he began to breathe hard. He was becoming excited again. He waved his hands in the air and then gave a third on the table. He let his eyes roll around as if he was speaking at a big political rally. Ryaki had never seen Kinuthia like this before, and why should they, who had been educated as Serenia, be so vehement against it? It was just like his father, who had sent him to the mission to which he had all his life objected. Perhaps life was a contradiction. Ryaki felt something stir in him. He was listened to Kinuthia stir in him as he listened to Kinuthia. Perhaps Kinuthia was speaking for the Sleeping Hills, for the whole of Kikuyu country. Then he suppressed the feeling and thought of the new drive in education. Perhaps this was the answer to a people's longing and hopes. For a moment he became lost in his contemplation of education and the plans he had in mind. Come, Wayaki, tell us about this new Kiyama. It was Kama who asked. Wayaki lost his vision, but he still watched the rain. This rain was a blessing, and the famine which people had feared would come if the drought had continued would now be averted. From the scooped flowed little narrow streams that ran through the grass. They mingled and flowed on to join the main stream like a small river, like Hanya, or like a flood, only this one would end and Hanya River would forever flow. And the small river went down, making a small murmuring sound, talking to itself or to the ground. Noah's flood, Wayaki thought. Kinuthia spoke. Yes, I think such a kiyama to preserve the purity of a tribal custom and our way of life should be formed now. Wayaki had heard about this kiyama. He knew the drive came from Kaboni. Wayaki feared they would give him a place in the leadership of the kiyama, which was meant to embrace all the ridges. He did not feel enthusiastic about it. He wanted to concentrate on education. Perhaps the teaching of Livingstone that education was one of the value, and his boys should not concern themselves with what the government was doing or politics had found a place in Wayaki's heart. It rained down. The downpour, almost slashing the sun, scorched grass. What was it? And still it rained, with the little stream gathering and joining together. He saw what they were doing, carrying away the soil, corroding, eating away the earth, stealing the land. And that was the cry of every ridge. Perhaps the sleeping lions would sleep no more, for they were all crying for the soil. The earth was important to the tribe. This was why King Thea and others like him feared the encroachment of the white man. They feared what had happened in Kiambu, Nyeri, and Murunga. The new settlers and Sirenia wore the same face. And Wayaki was thinking, was Muguwaki Biro right? One day the white man would go, and for a time Wayaki remembered his father and that prophecy. Suddenly, he became angry, not with the white man of Kinuthia. He was angry with the rain. The rain carried away the soil, not only here but everywhere. That was why land in some parts were becoming poor. For a time, he felt like fighting with the rain. The racing drops of water had turned to filth and mud. He subsided. He now felt like laughing heartily. Even here, in this natural happening, he could see a contradiction. The rain had to touch the soil. That touch could be a blessing or a curse. Wayaki was a man of strong emotional moods. The rain stopped. The little stream continued carrying away the soil. Now it was time to break up. The whole afternoon had been wasted. There was no way out. It had always to be like this. He would speak with the elders and see what he could be done about the roof. I think we had better let the children go. Wayaki told the others. Kama will tell them to bring jambers and spades tomorrow. We might think of mudding the building now that it has rained and there is plenty of water. The building certainly needed this. Even from where he stood, he could see big gaping holes along its ragged side. The bell, a piece of iron hanging outside by a string, was struck. A few minutes later, cries and shouts of children could be heard everywhere. School was over for the day. Wow, this book is getting better and better. Chapter 14. Maro Shoni, as Ryaki School was called, was well known in the country. Already, he had a history. It was the first people's own school to be built since the break with Serenia. It had been Ryaki's idea, and even now he could not understand fully how his idea had borne fruit so quickly. He saw it as something beyond himself, something ordained by fate. Even had followed, even something beyond him. I'm sorry. Do you just bunch up together? He saw it as something beyond himself, something ordained by fate. Event had followed, event in quick succession, quickening the rhythm of life in the hills. There had been the harvest, then Methoni's death, the tightening of Serena's mission laws to extent of not admitting to the school those who were the children of darkness, whose parents had not renounced the whole concept of circumcision. Ryaki could still remember the excitement and the tension created along the ridges by these events. His father's death had almost numbed him. He could not tell why, but Chege's death, though not unexpected, came as a shock to him. It seemed unfair that Chege should have died at that particular time. He should have lived longer, and Ryaki had gone on like a man drugged, not knowing what to think or do. He had all of a sudden become a grown man. He was now on his own. It was while he was in this mood that the idea of school had come to him. But what could he do? He being so young, and what had happened meant that he would never go back to Serenia. His time to work and serve the people had come. In starting self-help in education, Ryaki had seen it as a kind of mission. It was a mission which he followed with hope and passion. He traveled from ridge to ridge all over the country of the sleeping lions. He found a willing people. Yes, the ridges were beginning to awake. The trees, the birds, and the paths he trod all knew him, knew a man destined to serve his country. But it was not only place where this sort of, but it was not the, but here was not the only place where this sort of things was happening. This new spirit simultaneously surged all over the Kikuyu country, from Kirinyaga to Kabiti. Schools grew up like mushrooms. Often a school was nothing more than a shed, hurriedly thatched with grass. And there distilled symbols of people's thirst for the white man's secret magic and power. If you wanted to leave the white man's way, but all one thing, this magic, this work of building together was a tribute to the tribe's way of cooperation. It was determination to have something of their own making, fired by their own imagination. But it was more than this. Circumcision was an important ritual to the tribe. It kept people together, bound the tribe. It was at the core of social structure and something that gave meaning to a man's life. And of the custom and the spiritual basics of the tribe's cohesion and integration would be no more. The cry was up. Gikuyu Kuringa kept the tribe pure. Tuti Wengda Iwugu. It was a soul's cry, a soul's wish. The schools were soon overflowing with children, hungry for this thing. A class held many children came together, while their teachers, any who could be grabbed from Serenia, sat in front, and the expectant little eyes looked out to them, wanting to drink in this learning. And mothers and fathers waited, expecting their children to come home full of learning and wisdom. Parents would feel proud, very proud, when the son came in the evening with tear-washed face, beaten there Beaten? There, don't cry, you are a man, and he is a teacher, you know. That teacher is good. He beats them hard, and to the teacher passing through the village. Hey teacher, yes? Beat them harder. We want them to learn. The, ch- the children caught the enthusiasm of their parents. Perhaps they saw they were the hope and the glory of the tribe. But alongside these great changes, there were some people who had continued as of old, embedding to one way or the other. Ryaki was the headmaster of Myroshoni. He went there in the morning and went back home in the evening. It was nearly always like that. He liked it. The work gave him time to think about many of the problems connected with education. He wanted to do a lot for all, and serve faithfully, yet the power of hate and the ever widening rage generated, as it were by Thorny's death, was enough to worry anyone. There were the Christian led by Joshua, men of Joshua, as they were sometimes called. Their home, Mukuyu. Then there were the people of the tribe, who had always been against the mission and its faith. Kimino was, as it were, their home or base. The other ridges more or less followed this pattern, and so the ancient rivalry continued, sometimes under this or that guise. It was all confusion, building up and spreading under the outward calm of the ridges. Where did people like Wiyaki stand? Had he not received the white man's education, and was this not a part of the other faith? The new faith, the communal group, was strengthened by a breakaway group led by Kabuni. Wiyaki felt himself standing outside all this, and at times he felt isolated. Yet, amidst this isolation, he was proud. He was proud of the small but important role he had played in awakening the hills, the sleeping lions, and inside him he felt vaguely that it would be good to reconcile all these antagonisms. His role, however, did not satisfy him. He still felt hungry and yearned for something that would fill him whole, a thing that would take possession of the whole of himself. That something seemed beyond him, enmeshed as he was in the ways of the land. Wiyaki was now a tall, powerful built man who struck people as being handsome. Even so, this was not the most striking thing about him. It was his eyes. They looked delicately tragic, but they also appeared commanding and imploring. It was his eyes that spoke of that yearning, that longing for something that would fill him all in all. Sometimes the longing drove him to hard work. Wiyaki was capable of real hard labor. For this and his courage, determination, he was liked and admired by the people of the ridge. Maybe the very spirit that was in his father had entered him. So young, this puzzled people. The young could never be expected to lead or manage something that was big. Perhaps it is the white man's learning, they said. No, do you not remember him as a boy? Yes, always queer and full of quiet courage. It is the line he descends from. Don't you remember his father? Yes, he was. Wiyaki was becoming the pride of the hills and the pride of Camino. Already, they started calling him a champion of the tribe's way and life. He's destined for something greater. I can just smell it. God, why did I do that? Anyways, let's get into the last chapter of the day, which is chapter 15, and it is really long. Wow. Okay. Chapter 15. He could not sleep. Thin rays of the moon passed through the cracks in the wall into the hut and fell at various spots on the floor. It was no good staring blankly at the lazy darkness in which every object lost its clear edges. Wayaki wanted to talk to someone. That was what oppressed him. The desire to share his hopes, his yearning and longings with someone, his plans in education, the desire for assurance and release. Twice he had tried to tell his mother to ask her something, but each time he stood in front of her and he heard her shaky voice, he found himself talking of irrelevant things. It was strange that the tremor in her voice should set starting in his soul. After all, what was the longing? What was the something for which he yearned? Did he know it himself? Yet, the hopes and desire kept on haunting him. They had followed him all his life. He did not want to think, but thoughts came and flooded his heart. Strange chapters of his life unfolded before him. His young sister, who had died early, was the only person with whom he had been intimate. He had loved her, if that sort of closeness could be called love. He thought he loved the hills and their people, but did not give him that something he could get from her. Then he had been very small. Many seasons before his second birth, he wondered why he remembered that time, but she was dead. And death was the end of everything on this earth. After you were buried, you turn into a spirit. Rieki wondered if his sister was a spirit, a young, good spirit. Was she watching him? He turned around. Rather frightened, he felt guilty. Uyaki was superstitious. He believed the things that the people of the rich believed. Serenia's mission had done nothing effective to change this. His father had warned him against being contaminated by the ways of the white man. Yet, he sometimes wondered, was the education he was trying to spread in the rich not a contamination? He wanted to sleep. From side to side, he wriggled on his bed, trying to close his eyes and shut away these thoughts that would not leave him alone. He thought, there is something unexplainable in the coming of the white man. He had found no resistance in the hill. Now he had penetrated into the heart of the country, spreading his influence. This influence could be disruptive. Methonis had died on the high altar of this disruption. She had died with courage, probably still trying to resolve her death. Probably still trying to resolve the conflict within herself in an attempt to reach the light. Since her death, everything had gone from bad to worse, and probably conflicting cause and lures still strove within him. The hearts of many, not many, were like Muthoni in courage. Wayaki wondered where he was. Was he trying to create order and bring light in the dark? The image of his sister, that of Muthoni and many others, followed each other across his mind in quick succession. Shadow that had no concrete form. Shadow that came and went, sometimes merging, forming nothing. Then, for one moment, his life became one white fur. But only for a second. Then came the mist, dark with no definition. The clear edges of life had gone. He lay still, a little frightened, not knowing what to think or how to find a way out. The mist began to fade. Slowly, the edges seemed to be forming. He could now see the outline of a ship coming into being through the thinning mist. Wayaki waited for it to melt away into nothingness, but it did not. The ship remained there, fixed, and he could not drive it away. He peered at it and for a time was fascinated by it. It was the ship of a woman, and he could not make out who she was. Even this too vanished, and still he could not sleep. It was no good sitting in bed, staring into hazy darkness. He got out of bed, and it creaked as he stood up. He put on his clothes, quietly, with a slight inner agitation and excitement of a lover thinking of the impending meeting with his woman. He went out of the hut. He wanted to go to Mukuyu to see Kamo or any other person, a man maybe would understand him, a man to whom he could talk. The moon was also awake. Her glare was hard and looked brittle. The whole ridge and everything were a brilliant white, and the little thing that in the day appeared ordinary seemed now to be changed into unearthliness, that was both alluring and frightening. Wayaki listened for voices on the ridge, but could only hear silence as he moved across the ridge through small bushes and trees. The silence and the moon's glare seemed to have combined into one mighty force that breathed and had life. Wayaki wanted to feel at one with the whole creation, with the spirit of his sister and father. He hesitated. Then the oppression in him grew, and the desire to talk with someone mounted. The brightness of the moon seemed now soft and tangible, and he yielded for her magic. And Wayaki thrust out his arm and wanted to hold the moon close to his breast because he was sure she was listening, and he wanted her cold breath near him. Now his muscle and everything about his body seemed to vibrate with tautness. Again, he was restless, and the yearning came back to him. It filled him, and shook his whole being, so that he felt something in him would burst. Yearning, yearning. Was life all a yearning and no satisfaction? Was one to live a strange hollowness pursuing, like a malignant beast that would not let one rest? Wayaki could not know. Perhaps nobody will ever know. You had just to be. Wayaki was made to serve the tribes, living day by day with no thoughts of self but always of other. He had now for many seasons been trying to drain himself dry for the people, yet this thing still pursued him. Suddenly, he thought he knew what he wanted: freedom. He wanted to run hard, run anywhere, or hover aimlessly, wandering everywhere like a spirit. Then he would have everything, every flower, every tree, or could fly to the moon. This seemed possible, and Wayaki raised his eye to the sky. His heart bled for her. But he could not run, and he could not fly. All this while Wayaki had been moving. Soon he was down at home at Hanya's river. The crickets went on with their incessant shrillings. The quiet throb of the river echoed in his heart. He felt comforted. The water looked strange under the moon. He crossed the river and began climbing up the slope, following the cattle road that would take him to Joshua's village, Mukuyu. He would go and see Kamo. It was strange how his life and Kamo's and Kinuthia seemed to be running on the same road, always affected by the same events. When young, they used to take their herds grazing together, At Sirenia, they were together. It was only after Wiyaki's circumcision that they separated for a time. Kama was initiated for a few months after the breakaway, and now they were together at Maroshoni. For a time, Weki became wrapped in thoughts about Kamo, Kinuthia, and their life at school. Oh, he stopped, short, and looked up. He had almost collided with the woman. Weki did not speak another word or more. Nyambur was standing in front of him and he felt awkward. Oh, is it you? He said at last. Just to break the silence, I did not know it was you. She hastily said and glanced back over the shoulder. Excuse me. I was lost in my own thoughts. Weki had not seen much Nyamburu, and whenever they met, they were like strangers. Weki was thinking of a day when he had seen Nyambura coming from Honya River, a huge water calabash on her back. He had been sitting on a raised bit of the ground, and he had known she was past near he was. At this, he had felt afraid and hidden in the bush. He had watched her trudging up the hills till she had vanished. He had felt relief. That was now many seasons past. He had not thought of any more about her, not until tonight, and all at once recognized the shape of his mind and refused to melt into nothingness. Nyambura still feared her father. She knew that if he saw her standing there, he would be angry. She was often lonely. The day Hormidoni had deprived her of the only companion she had ever had. So now she went to the river alone. She went to church alone. Now and then she would strike up a friendship with one or two on the ridge, but not one of them could replace Mathoni. Often Nyambura wept when she remembered her and all the places they had been together. All the secrets they all ever whispered to one another, flooding her mind. Then she would feel the pain inside her. The pain wrung dry her heart, and no tears would fall. And sometimes she would run to Hanya and just stay there watching the flow of the water. Then she would go home feeling at peace. So, the river, especially on Sunday, was her companion. She had her own place where she often went. To her father she grew cold, although she obeyed him in everything, and thought that Mathoni had been wrong to disobey a father. She could not fail to connect Joshua with her sister's death. She still thought it a sin to be circumcised. When such a thought came, she wondered if that had not been punishment from the heaven, but somehow she could not accuse her sister of sinning. Tell Nyambura I see Jesus. She always remembered these words, and she clung to them. She was grateful to Wiyaki for bringing them to her. She wondered about him. She could never understand him. He was educated at a mission, yet he was leading the elements who had broken away from Serenia. Was it not known everywhere that it was this young man who had started the schools? Maroshoni was famous everywhere. Nyambura thought Wiyaki proud. Why? Whenever they met, he would never stop to talk. Perhaps he feared her father. Not that she wanted anything from him, but somehow she often longed to discover Mathoni's death with someone who could understand. Wiyaki was the only person who had been close to her sister, and Nyambura could never think of Mathoni's without Wiyaki coming into the picture. Sometimes she wished she had been on their side. He was so young and strong and knew so much. She would have spoken to him about many things. She rarely met him, and when they met, she always waited for him to make it possible for her to talk to him. But he always passed on after a quick greeting, a queer man. Sometimes she feared him and thought he refused to talk to her because she was the daughter of Joshua. Again, Nyambura glanced over her shoulder in the direction of her home. She wondered whether to stop or to go on. She heard Wiyaki's voice. I am going to see Camo. And I, Johanna, my father has sent me to him to tell him to come to our home tonight. There was a little silence. Then they both laughed. We like your heartbeat faster. Then we can walk together, he suggested. They moved on slowly. He was at loss and did not know what to say. He was thinking of this girl. Bethany had been the cause of their first meeting. The Nyambura had been a fairly tall girl with well-formed features. Now he could see the woman in her under the bright moonlight. What are you going to do there? She asked. Wayaki thought, what am I going to do there? It was then that it occurred to him that he did not want to see Camo. Not now. He too thought of the people and when they would now and what they would say now if they saw them walking together. Above them the moon gazed and lit the whole land. Nyambura was not circumcised, but this was not a crime. Something passed between them as two human beings, untainted with religion, social convention, or any tradition. Just to see Camo and the family, Nyambura felt a little angry. She thought he was going to see Kaboni to discuss their activities. They came to a place where the ways parted. They stopped and stood and held together by something outside themselves. Perhaps it was the magic of the moon. Perhaps it was the magic. Perhaps it was the magic of the moon that held them both rooted on the spot. Wek wanted to dance the magic and ritual of the moon. His heart beat hard, beating out the darkness, and Nyambura stood there looking as if she were the embodiment of serene beauty, symbolized by the flooding moon and the peace around. Suddenly, Wayaki felt as if the burning desire in his heart would be so free. He only could touch her, just touch her. Hand on her hair, he controlled himself. A strange uneasiness began to creep through him. Are you still teaching? Yes, I have not seen your school. You should come someday. And why not tomorrow, in the afternoon, just after school closes? I could take you around. Afternoon. That was a good time. The teachers and the children would have gone. She agreed. They parted without even shaking hands. She left him there, standing watching her vanishing form. He moved a few paces forward and then abruptly stopped and turned back. He did not feel like seeing anybody else that night. And with that last sentence, it would be the end of chapter 15 and today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you guys thought about the past 5 chapters. And if you have anything else you want to say, please feel free to leave it down in the comments. With that being said, my name is Ivan and this was The River Between. As always, have a good day and be good people. Bye.